Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Welcome to KSMQ and A, a new outreach program featuring community voices on topics that matter to you. I'm your host, Matt Bluhm, joined by co-host Dan Urlick. Today on KSMQ and A, we'll be discussing drug chemical dependency and substance abuse prevention. Our featured guest panel includes Casey Lind, the Mower County Health and Human Services Manager, and Ben Johnson, Commander of the South Central Drug Investigations Unit. And I'm going to start with you, Ben. What is more prevalent now, the illegal use of prescription drugs or the illicit use of drugs like meth or cocaine?
That's kind of a difficult question to ask, whether which one is more prevalent, and it would vary regionally. I think in our rural area, it's probably more towards the methamphetamine. We have probably a higher proportional problem with methamphetamine than fentanyl at this point. Just in the last few years, we've seen fentanyl climbing up probably at a pace faster than methamphetamine or cocaine. Cocaine stays pretty stagnant or at the same level it has price-wise and use, I think. Seizures have gone up, but I think as far as prescription pill abuse, I guess I wouldn't have a whole lot of data to support what my presumption is, but I think that a lot of people who are using prescription pills are seeking them to use them rather than or taking fentanyl by mistake, thinking that it's prescription pills.
Right.
So I think that for the most part, around here in the counties that I am the commander in are Waseca, Freeborn, Steele, and Faribault counties. I would say that methamphetamine is still probably the king.
And just a quick question, just to make sure, is fentanyl, that is a prescription drug, right? Or is that something else?
There are medicinal uses for fentanyl, much like a lot of other opiates. They start out as kind of an analgesic or a medication that's intended to numb pain. And so there are currently medicinal uses for fentanyl, but also with many other prescription substances or drugs that have medicinal qualities or are abuse properties as well that you see with fentanyl too.
So have you found maybe that maybe people are taking advantage of their prescriptions and selling that, for other people to use?
I think from my perspective on that, I think that was a much larger problem years ago. I think there's been some safeguards put in and a little bit more awareness towards people who are seeking pills and taking those maybe outside the parameters of their prescriptions or not as prescribed anyway. But yeah, those people do still seek pills. These people have an addiction, and however you're going to do that. But I do think that there has been some progress made in the number of pills that you can just go in and get. And I think that there has been some positive stuff that's happened in the last few years.
Have you found that maybe fentanyl is being cut with meth or cut with cocaine, or have you seen that?
Yes, we see that a lot of times, and we sometimes don't know when we make a seizure or when we do a search warrant, we get controlled substance. This person we may believe and know is dealing methamphetamines, for example. When we get an unknown substance, we always treat it as it's fentanyl because you want to be abundantly cautious with fentanyl. Just because it has, it's transdermal, you can touch it, and you could possibly overdose. Somebody with no tolerance for fentanyl could overdose just by handling it. So we're very careful, and we test everything with field test strips, and it can give us tell us what these substances are. But it doesn't really tell us what proportion they are or what the composition of this substance is. So without a mass spectrometer and the BCA testing, we a lot of times don't know if it's actually cut or if it's just cross-contamination because they deal with both substances. But they do. That is a tactic of people who are trying to sell fentanyl, is they will sneak it in small doses on whatever it is that you're buying to get you to try and gain a market for that drug because it is highly addictive. But yes, a lot of times what happens too is with shipments, if somebody's getting a large shipment of methamphetamines or cocaine or something like that, they'll throw in maybe a little bit of fentanyl. Hey, can you get rid of this? And that will sometimes also start a market for fentanyl, which is maybe more highly addictive.
Sounds dangerous too.
Yes, absolutely.
What is the strength of fentanyl? What can we compare that to?
That I'm not sure on the. I can refer you to like the DEA's One Pill Can Kill. They have a One Pill Can Kill website that's got. It's managed by the DEA and it's done pretty nice. They update this and a lot of times we get like these intelligence briefings, and I'm surprised at how quickly from our intelligence briefing to the One Pill Can Kill website, they're updating that. So people who are out there using it or have family members or somebody that they know that's using these substances, they've got pretty much right up to date information on what these new substances might be and what they are. And I think they specify about, I don't even want to guess that it's a very small amount of fentanyl could be fatal for somebody who doesn't have a tolerance or is not a frequent user. However, somebody who uses regularly will oftentimes be able to use quite a bit more than that. And at the cost, it becomes quite an expensive habit. And the more you use, the more you need the next time to get to that same place. So it's kind of a cycle for these people. It's hard to see them get out of it.
So and how long has meth been around? Like, it's been a long time, right? And it's not going away.
Well, I think that I guess I'm not 100% sure on how long it's been around. I want to say that they're using an amphetamine of some type during the World War II. I'm not 100% positive on that. I know just regionally here, we had it probably when you used to have meth labs all over. We don't see very many meth labs anymore. Not saying that there isn't some people still out there cooking, but most of this methamphetamine that we see now is much higher quality, and it is coming from super labs, laboratory grade facilities that are creating better quality methamphetamine. But when probably, I would say in the mid 90s, maybe that's just because that's about how old I was when I had any awareness of this, it was called crank. Pseudoephedrine cooks primarily, and they called it crank, I think, because it was a biker thing. They kept it in the crank case of their motorcycles. And if that's not true, that's what I've heard anyway. And they moved it around. And we really don't see much of those type cooks anymore. But I really don't know. I don't think it's going away. I can't believe with the awareness that there is out there right now, especially you see the billboards where you see this, nice looking person at 20 years old, and then you see the stages of progression of what this does to your body. I can't believe there's one young person that tries it anymore. I think it's a testament to kind of where some people are at life, and what they'll do, and some people's situation is just bad. But yeah, I don't think it's going away.
Okay. And I know you have more questions that I'll toss to you soon.
Sure.
But I'm going to ask Casey too. So what do you think what's more prevalent now? Illegal abuse of prescription drugs like fentanyl, or the use of illicit drugs like meth or cocaine?
I think I would echo everything that Ben was saying. It's hard to tell, especially with prescription drugs. They may start out being used appropriately and then progress into being abused or misused, right? And so it's hard to know for sure exactly how many of the prescription drugs that are truly prescribed out there are being taken as prescribed or are being abused. So it becomes difficult to tell if if that's more common or more prevalent than methamphetamine use.
Okay. Go ahead.
Casey, we've heard for years about the opioid crisis. That's not a new term. Where do you think we're at? Do you think it's peaked? Have we beat it down at all, or is it getting worse progressively?
I think certainly, at least in my experience, there's more awareness, right? I see a lot more things across social media and in the news media as well, and just there's more awareness and conversation around it, which I think is a good thing, right? Now, to be able to say, have we reached its peak or is it declining? I don't think we will know that information until 5-10 years from now, right? And we look back and we're able to look at the data, what the data and the research says to say, was this the peak and now is this where it's starting to drop back down, or is there more to come? It's hard to say at this point, but the awareness around it I think is certainly increased.
So Ben, do you think we've seen a trend that might be going that direction?
I have not seen anything that would support that. I agree that I think the awareness, though, is probably your foundational step, is to get the most people aware of what this is and where we're at. And statistics a lot of times are very difficult, especially over a long period of time, to use, because sometimes they're not going to basically, because things change, laws change, and just the way that we count and measure, what are we using for our rubric to measure our success?
Right, so when they change the rules in football,
Yes.
all the data gets messed
Exactly.
up, and the same with,
Yep,
narcotics.
exactly. That is a great analogy. And I think that's a lot. What are we using to quantify or qualify our success? And I think we've got some stuff that has changed recently that's going to kind of make that hard if we're not going to be comparing apples to apples, comparing data from 10 years ago to data from now or 10 years from now. It's going to be kind of hard.
Okay, for those of you who might be just tuning in, today on KSMQ and A, we are discussing substance abuse in community and with our panel of representatives. And Ben, where do you think most black market opioids originate from?
Well, opioids, long time has been heroin. That's been primarily where it was, and that Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, kind of the Western Asian countries where a lot of heroin came from, and that was your opioids traditionally. Recently, most of them are, and I think the avenues to get here have been the kind of hallmark ways that things have gotten into our country for a long time. So now fentanyl is a lot of it's made in China or in Asia, smuggled into, or maybe not even smuggled, transported into Central America and Mexico, and then just brought up across our border. And obviously that's a huge problem. There's very little to stop anybody from coming across our border, and much less stop people that are carrying illicit narcotics. And then once it gets into our country, then it can go a number of different ways. They're driving it in cars, which is a lot of times been there, but they're trafficking it and shipping. They're using USPS and like UPS and FedEx or whatever, what have you. They'll use all of those, and mailing a lot of it. And I think the people are expecting to get some of it taken off or seized, but it's a lower risk for them. If they get some taken away, it's a cost of doing business. So that's how it gets into our region, because none of it is really made here.
Oh, and what about heroin? I guess we haven't talked about that yet, but is that still a big problem? Is that still out on the streets, available to people? Is that? still a thing. I guess.
I heard about heroin. We had heroin this morning for the first time I've heard of in at least 2 years of somebody having something that would test for heroin. And that's maybe not the same for other task force commanders or agents or whatever, but it's that's probably the first time I heard about it this morning. Heroin is difficult to get. It's it's a plant. It's poppy. It comes from that. You can synthetically make fentanyl. It's more powerful, cheaper, easier to get here. And the way a lot of it is now is it's camouflaged in these M30 pills, these blue, they call them Percocets or Oxycontins or whatever.
So people may not know that they're taking fentanyl when
You could make that argument, but I find that exceptionally rare. To the people people are knowing what they're buying.
I see.
They know what they're buying. I'm not saying that there isn't the outlying exception to that, where somebody thinks that this is going to help their back pain, and then they end up overdosing on fentanyl. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but
Right.
it doesn't happen very often at all.
Okay. How about you? Where do you feel most black market opioids originate from?
Again, I think within my role and my experience, I don't have a lot of information. I think that would be able to speak to that point, other than understanding that a lot of opioids are being synthetically made and created and then brought in, right? From where they're being made and where they're being brought in from, I couldn't tell you, but I do know, and the research kind of supports too, that is something that you're seeing more often, is the synthetic opioids, as opposed to the heroin, which takes a little bit more work and labor, honestly, to be able to produce.
Yeah. So Casey, do you think as long as there's a demand for illicit drugs, that there'll always be a supply?
Unfortunately, I think that is probably a truth that there should continue to be conversation around, right? And much like with anything, supply and demand exists, whether you're talking about illicit substances or things that you can buy on a supermarket shelf, right? If people want something, they will explore and try to figure out ways to get it. Generally, I think people will try to explore legal methods first to say, I want that, and is it legal? And if so, can I get it and obtain it in legal ways? And if there's something that they want that isn't legal, or something that they want that they can't obtain in legal ways, then they start to get creative and explore other ways of acquiring that thing that they want or need.
And what I would add to that too is it's not always the person, it's not the end user always that's seeking this. Sometimes and oftentimes, and we see it a lot, and when we do search warrants on phones, a lot of times it's somebody marketing this to somebody else. So it's beneficial to them and profitable for you to use fentanyl that I sell to you, and for you to want to use it. So a lot of times, the person who's the end user, the person that you see on the faces of meth billboards, that's not the person doing it, but it's the person that is profiting from that likes this lifestyle that they've kind of glamorized in young culture now, of lots of money, lots of, mass criminality actually is a lot of people committing a lot of crimes, and if the reward is always worth more than the risk, why wouldn't you keep doing that? If it's easier than going to work and going to college and getting a real job, if you can make a lot of money doing this in an alternative lifestyle that's kind of glamorous in certain populations and people, like that's a glamorous way of living, yeah, it's going to be there.
So is a solution worth considering legalization of drugs that might eliminate that kind of that glamorization of the drug dealer lifestyle?
I don't think that I personally don't think that. I think that is just the most absurd idea. But just because if you see what this actually does, this takes a toll on people. I think it should go the other way. There should be much harsher penalties for these people. That risk is no longer, or the reward is no longer worth the risk of you having to give up, the next 20 years of your life because you just sold pills to somebody and killed 2 young people. You know, because a lot of these people that we see, unfortunately, talking about fentanyl and the use and the tolerance that we're going back a couple of questions, a lot of the people who are getting hurt from this and a lot of the people who are getting poisoned and overdose are very young, inexperienced people, and people who are in, you know, precarious situations at home, who are kind of at-risk segments of our population. Those are the people that are dying, and I don't like that.
Yeah, how do you feel?
I was just going to say, you know, to kind of add to that point, I think it's, in my opinion, it's less about criminalizing or decriminalizing and more about exploring and treating the underlying concern or the underlying problems that might be coming, right? Like if somebody is struggling with a substance use addiction, jail is not the place for them to be, right? That we need treatment, we need services in place that will allow them to overcome that addiction. You know, and so that obviously is speaking more to the individuals that are found using, not necessarily the individuals that are out there pushing the product and selling, right? Additionally, I think it's important to think about harm reduction strategies and recognize that there are going to be times where, because of where somebody is at in their either their recovery journey or because of the struggle that they have with their addiction, they may not be ready or able to stop using. And so what strategies are there going to be that can help that individual start to move towards that outcome of no longer using, or helping them to identify what safe use is so that we can reduce the amount of people that are overdosing or those types of things from substance use.
I agree with that, and I've seen that too. I will say, though, from a law enforcement perspective, I agree with the harm reduction strategy, but at what cost? I see these drugs are so expensive. You know, I'll just, for easy math, just say, well, let's just call a gram of meth right now is probably $50 or less. And if people are doing, or fentanyl, let's just say, if you're doing a $100 gram a day of fentanyl, and you're doing this all day long, every day, it's an expensive habit. And to do that, you steal stuff from other people. You commit frauds. There's all kinds of other crimes that come with that. And if this person doesn't belong in jail, there has to be some way of safeguarding so they're not hurting other people while they're not in jail. Because there is a lot of that. I mean, everybody's had something stolen or knows somebody who's had something stolen, and a lot of that is being driven by user level people's need for drugs. Maybe not the violent crimes so much by the user levels, people, but a lot of the property crime that affects everybody is coming directly from that.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so Dan, I'm going to skip down to the last question here because I think this is an important question that maybe we should talk about in Minnesota because of the recent legalization of marijuana use. So, Casey, what effect do you feel recreational marijuana legalization has had on Minnesota, I guess?
You know, I think we're still new into that legislation, right? I think it's similar to we aren't really going to know the outcomes of what that legalization or that legislation means until we've been able to see data or research that kind of is starting to explore some of those things. I know, previously in other conversations, I've mentioned that the question has come up, with legalization of marijuana, will that lead to more opioid use, right? And I think my response to that is always not necessarily, right? I mean, there are going to be people that will use marijuana or other substances that will never touch opioids. There are people that are using opioids that have maybe never touched marijuana, right? So that there is a relationship there where there is probably a large number of people that have used marijuana and progressed onto opioids.
But that doesn't prove cause.
But it's not causation, right?
How about you, Ben? Do you feel the same way?
I think it's kind of a disaster, just the way it's come out. But I also think that, I guess, to clarify your question is like, how is it going to affect us? Is that going forward?
Yeah, and will it have any effect on the opioid crisis going on?
100% it will. Because traffickers, a lot of criminals, I mean, they're drug users, they're traffickers, they're committing crimes. They use marijuana. Almost, I'm not going to say all of them, but a lot of them, and most of them use marijuana. Marijuana used to be a way that we could search a car because it was a prohibited controlled substance. We can't search a car based on the smell of the odor of marijuana anymore. When we went in there before, we got into pills, stolen checks from a burglary, guns, all of these other things that we would use marijuana to further expand the scope of the traffic stop are gone. So those things are still going down your roadways.
Okay, well, great. That's it. Thank you very much for joining along. I'd like to thank our guests today for joining in this important community discussion. These days, everyone seems to know someone affected by substance abuse, and our hopes here today are that we've left everyone with a little more insight into this important issue. I'm your host, Matt Bluhm, with co-host Dan Urlick. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next KSMQ and A.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.